Tony Stark, genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. That's got a much better ring to it than arms dealer, narcissist, womanizer, and failure. For their first entry in what would become a sprawling cinematic universe, Marvel did not tell the story of a typically virtuous hero. A billionaire executive of a weapons manufacturing company is a more likely villain of a story, if anything, and CEOs are certainly no strangers to the antagonist role in Marvel films. But it's difficult to hold on to these reservations for long.
It's an imperfect world, but it's the only one we've got. I guarantee you, the day weapons are no longer needed to keep the peace, I'll start making bricks and beams for baby hospitals.
You rehearse that much?
Every night in front of the mirror before bedtime.
All I want is a serious answer.
Okay, here's serious. My old man had a philosophy. Peace means having a bigger stick than the other guy.
You ever lose an hour of sleep your whole life?
He's prepared to lose a few with you.
The audience, like Miss Everhart, are seduced by Tony's unapologetic defense of his life's work and his magnetic charisma. Tony is drawn as an autonomous creative genius on the cutting edge of science. There's a reason that billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk, who is synonymous with the cutting-edge companies he founded and whose personal vision defines their stock value, is compared to Tony Stark. Tony is a modern-day Howard Hughes, a visionary whose company serves as an extension of their larger-than-life ego. At the start of the film, Tony believes in America's role as the global peacekeeper and his personal role as America's armory.
To peace!
But Tony's faith in his legacy, as well as his own sense of autonomy, is annihilated by a missile bearing his own name. After he gets captured, Tony has his creative and physical agency stripped away from him, forced to build one of his weapons for a terrorist, needing to be kept alive by a magnetic device. In a sort of reversal of Plato's allegory, it is inside the dark cave as a prisoner that Tony becomes enlightened to his own hand in proliferating the violence that he sought to prevent.
That is your legacy, Stark. Your life's work in the hands of those murderers. Is that how you want to go out? Is this the last act of defiance of the great Tony Stark?
Here begins Tony Stark's journey to reclaim his autonomy. He starts with the creation of his arc reactor, which we might as well call the Stark reactor. This device, Tony's technological crown jewel, lives inside of his body. Unlike a missile that's manufactured by his company, the arc reactor is tangibly inseparable from Tony. He owns it in every sense. While a chest full of metal first represented the loss of his freedom, it now enabled his escape and allowed him to reforge his legacy.
My turn.
The first thing that Tony does after escaping captivity is call for a press conference. In an effort to take personal responsibility for his past, as well as assert his professional autonomy, Tony announces that weapons will no longer be manufactured at his company. The fallout of this announcement highlights some major differences between Tony and Obadiah Stane, Tony's second in command. One of his first reactions to Tony's announcement is a concern over the stock value.
Does the Hindenburg ring any bells?
Tony Stark and Obadiah Stane represent two distinct conceptions of the American capitalist. Tony takes actions independently, while Obadiah relies on manipulation to get his way. Obadiah is a corporatist, a suit and tie wearing, cigar smoking businessman, the one who deals with the shareholders and the board of directors while Tony builds the future in his garage. These differences between Tony and Obadiah speak to a larger framework that defines the role of weapons in global conflicts. At the beginning of Iron Man, Tony's narcissism and lack of self-reflection contributed to a naive understanding of his company in the global security game. Tony grew up trying to live up to his father, a man whose inventions helped defeat the Nazis and end World War II.
My father helped defeat the Nazis. He worked on the Manhattan Project. A lot of people, including your professors at Brown, would call that being a hero.
But modern conflicts are not as simple as states fighting states or Americans fighting Nazis. The world of Iron Man and the preceding MCU is a post-Westphalian world, one in which non-state actors, such as Stark Industries or the Ten Rings, have increasingly independent authority. The Avengers themselves are basically a lawless militia that ignores borders and sovereign rights, which was, essentially, the Secretary of State's critique of the Avengers in Civil War. In a Westphalian world, wars over territory would be waged by sovereign states, but sovereign rights don't have much weight when a robot can lift a city out of the earth, or when a terrorist organization can own the most powerful weapons in the world. The Ten Rings is not a state, but because of their access to Stark weapons, a man like Raza can dream of conquering Asia.
Whoever holds the latest Stark weapons rules these lands. And soon, it'll be my turn.
He references the technological superiority of the Mongol Empire as though the Ten Rings can conquer land, and given their supply of Stark weapons from Obadiah, they make progress toward that goal. Obadiah is an operative of the post-Westphalian world order. As the representative of a multinational corporation, Obadiah has no loyalty to country or anything except money. As such, he has no problem selling weapons to terrorists as long as they're willing to pay. The realization that Obadiah had been selling weapons directly to the Ten Rings is what ultimately made Tony Stark realize that his struggle for autonomy was far from over.
I didn't approve any shit.
Well, your company did.
Well, I'm not my company.
Given this truth, what role do weapons play in global security? Whether through corrupt double dealings or simply their vast supply, the world's most destructive weapons will make their way into the hands of any murderer willing to pay for the privilege. This, in turn, puts pressure on militaries to ramp up their might even further.
We're ironmongers. We make weapons.
My name on the side of the
And
building,
what we do keeps the world from falling into chaos.
not based on what I saw.
It's a vicious cycle that Tony, unbeknownst to him, profited from tremendously. But Tony doesn't lose faith in weapons entirely. Tony believes that he has the power to save lives and defeat terrorists as Iron Man, but he understands that the same cycle that put Jericho missiles into the hands of the Ten Rings can eventually exploit his arc reactor-powered suit.
I don't want this winding up in the wrong hands. Maybe mine can actually do some good.
Unfortunately, Tony left something behind when he flew away from his captors and crash-landed in the Afghan desert. Despite his secrecy and caution, his Iron Man designs are found by the Ten Rings, and the cycle begins anew.
I will give you these designs as a gift. And in turn, I hope you'll repay me with a gift of iron soldiers.
Making quick work of his former allies, Obadiah steals Tony's original Iron Man designs and tries to build one himself the only way he knows how. But throwing money at a problem has its limits.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Obadiah has to then pull the technology out of Tony's chest, completing the cycle that Tony desperately tried to avoid. Tony is left nearly dead not once, but twice as the result of his inventions. This struggle against his own creations becomes a recurring theme for the character of Iron Man throughout the MCU, becoming most obvious in Avengers: Age of Ultron. After the devastation of the first Avengers film, Tony invents the ultimate peacekeeper, an artificial intelligence optimized to prevent conflicts and eliminate threats. Despite Tony's good intentions, his AI Ultron has a mind of its own, and decides that in order to execute its programming, it would need to restart civilization. The final battle in Iron Man is between Tony and Obadiah, now donning the Ironmonger suit powered by Tony's arc reactor. While Obadiah does feel out of place flying around in a giant metal exoskeleton, this finale is a fitting climax in Tony's conflict with his destructive inventions, this time physically fighting a more powerful reincarnation of his Iron Man prototype.
How ironic, Tony! Trying to rid the world of weapons, you gave it its best one ever!
After Tony successfully fries the Ironmonger, the film famously concludes with Tony announcing to a press room,
I am Iron Man.
Tony certainly felt like he had won the day, confident that he had reclaimed his company and his life's work. While revealing his identity would have opened up Stark Industries to higher scrutiny, perhaps Tony was just taking a risk to feed his ego. But more likely, Tony was taking ownership and accountability over his creation, one whose destructive power he had already faced. Iron Man is not a missile with a Stark Industries label. It is an extension of Tony himself, and he needed the world to know that.
I am Iron Man. You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
Tony Stark's grand journey took root in the first entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and has not let up in over a decade. Armed not with Infinity Stones or divine powers, just his intellect and independence, Tony became a man who could challenge even the gods. And even though his inventions and unilateral actions often create conflict and end in tragedy, as long as Tony Stark lives, Iron Man will continue to defeat Earth's greatest threats. Let's just say there's a reason that Doctor Strange needed to keep Tony alive during the Infinity War. Tony may have one weapon left to yield in his struggle to save the universe.